Welcome to our discussion about effective emails. We are going to talk about the purposes of emails generally, about the special aspects of emailing legal information, and finally some strategies to make effective emails. I am not exaggerating when I say that during a semester I get more than 100 emails a day. Not all of them are from students, but a large number of them are. And I would say about 25% are effectively written. The vast majority are poorly written. In some sense, that's not a big deal because you're not actually writing this in a professional context. But it is still not doing the student who's sending me the unprofessional email very much good because there are two big problems with it. First of all, a person who writes emails in an ineffective way is developing some bad habits. And it's going to be hard to change those bad habits. When you don't think about an email as an important document that you have to invest time to get it right, then when you actually are in an environment in which it is important that you get your emails right, it'll be easy for you to fall into your old habits. So please, if you haven't already, start taking emails to your instructors, to potential employers. Seriously, if you're emailing your best friend or your spouse or something like that, you can ignore this. But if you are emailing anyone other than that person in your close circle of family and friends, please take these words seriously so that you can start making some adjustments. The other reason that it's important, even at this point, to write effective emails is that when you write an effective email, the odds of you getting the information or the accommodation or whatever it is that you want plummet. The person's receiving it, their first reaction is, wow, this person didn't even spend the time to compose a careful email. And then the second part, so their first reaction is very negative. And they're oftentimes kind of a little bit hurt, maybe a little offended. Wow, this person doesn't think enough of me to invest 2 or 3 minutes to actually compose an email. So it creates some ill will on the part of the recipient. The next problem is that a poorly written email usually doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, it probably made sense to the person who wrote it, who was looking at a particular document or a particular question, but keep in mind that the recipient might be teaching several different courses, might be working several units ahead at that time, and so your casual question where you're looking at a document, while it makes perfect sense to you, the odds of it making perfect sense to somebody else are small. And so what your imprecisely worded email will usually spark is, if the instructor is engaged enough to respond, is a string of questions. Now, which course are you in of mine? Which section are you in of mine? Which unit are you talking about? What page is that term used? Lots of questions. Of course, if you had composed your email carefully to begin with, you would probably now have already received your answer. But instead, you get a line of questions. You're going to have to ultimately do the hard work of figuring out, oh, yeah, let me phrase that more precisely. Oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't tell the instructor that piece of information. So it's important for you to brainstorm, to kind of reverse engineer, to imagine yourself being the employer or the instructor or the client and see, well, if I were to receive this email as a surprise out of context, how would this make sense to me? What questions would I have? Try to anticipate those questions, plan around them, over-include the answers. You may be including information that isn't necessary, but assume that the recipient isn't necessarily on your wavelength, and that way you're so much more likely to get a good response. You're going to create goodwill in the recipient, and the recipient's going to find it easy to accommodate you. And those two combinations, goodwill and ease of getting the reply that you want, is a winning combination for you. Now, I'm not giving you this advice to make my life easier. I'm giving you this advice to make your life easier. Because I can promise you, when I get an email from a student who hasn't devoted the time to spell check, that goes on my list of things I'll get to probably, but I am much more excited about responding to the student who has spent some time and some attention to it. Sometimes I get emails from students, and I can't even tell who it is, and I can't tell which class they're in, and I don't even understand what they're asking. Or maybe it's not clear to me they're asking anything. Maybe it's just kind of an FYI. Hey, I didn't get this. Okay, good for you. You didn't get this. I don't even know what you didn't get. And I'm not going to respond to it. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to respond to it. I respond to a lot of things that I probably shouldn't because I'm rewarding for emails. but yeah, you're going to get a much more willing, a much more detailed response when you show the recipient that level of respect. So please, please, please don't send me emails that don't follow these guidelines. Very likely what you'll get in response to me is, hey, before I answer your question, let's talk about email etiquette. So let's get started. Okay, you are in a professional situation. Let's forget about being a student for now. You are a paralegal in a law firm, and you need to get some information or send some information to another person, or you need to ask this other person a question. And so you are at a crossroads. You don't know what you need to do. Should you email to either provide this information or request this information? Should you call that person up and say, hey, let me tell you what I know? Should you write a formal letter? Or perhaps you should set up a meeting to talk about this, have a face-to-face type of interaction. I guess you could send a telegram, smoke signals, a facsimile. There's a few other approaches too. But those are kind of your options. And I think it's a useful exercise to pause before you make a decision about which method to use and say which is going to be the most effective. All of those methods, with the possible exception of smoke signals, are probably going to be the right choice from time to time, depending upon lots of different factors. And so think it through before you make that decision. If you decide that the email is the right way for you to go, you also are going to want to think about, what do I need to include in this email because it's a legal email? Are there special features I need to have? What do those look like? Do I want to use them every time or only sometimes? And so we'll talk about that question as well. And then we'll finally talk about probably the most important of these topics, which is, how do I write an effective email? It's not hard. It doesn't even take a long time. Once you know the steps that you need, it almost writes itself. But you have to know the steps, and you have to be able to apply them. So let's get applying. Let's go to our first question again is, what means of communication should I use? Let's first of all talk about the advantages of email. Most of us know these advantages because we use email all the time. The first advantage is it's very easy to use. I mean, it's just right there for you. You don't have to find the person, have them answer the phone. You don't have to leave a voicemail message. You don't have to do any of that stuff. It's super easy to do. And that's probably the single biggest advantage. Another big advantage is that it can leave a permanent record. If you send me an email and you don't delete it, then there's going to be a record that you sent it to me. So if later on I say, well, gee, I never got your email, you can say, well, that's strange because I have a record of it. It's possible I didn't get it. It's possible that the system didn't forward it as it should have, but more likely than not, I did receive it, and perhaps I just missed seeing it. But this creates a permanent record so that if you need a record that you send it to me, you've got it. If you had called me on the phone or you had spoken to me in person, you wouldn't have that permanent record. I guess if you called me on your cell phone, you might have a record that you called me, but you wouldn't have a record of what we talked about. Third thing is that most of the time recipients like emails. A lot of people prefer them to actual telephone conversations, and they're certainly more convenient than meeting in person. So the recipient, in many cases, is going to be happy with this mode of communication. And then it's quick. This kind of goes with it being easy. I can send an email, and sometimes I'll get a response within seconds. It actually can be quicker than making a telephone call because if you call somebody up, there's a little bit of small talk you have to do, and with email, a lot of that gets stripped away, so it can actually be quicker than talking. And especially if you aren't able to reach the person live. And finally, it's free. You don't have any long-distance expenses. You don't have to pay for postage or pay for facsimile transmission. So there's lots of advantages to email. Now let's look at the disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage is, while it's easy to do, it's also easy to do incorrectly. There's lots of opportunities for mistakes with emails. The big one is to send it to the wrong person. We have all done that in our lives. I will tell you my story about doing that. And if you haven't sent an email to the wrong person, that is in your future. It happens to everyone. When I was working at JCPenney, I had several clients with whom I worked with on a regular basis, and most of them were awesome. But I had this one client who was slightly less than awesome. He and I didn't get along that great. He thought I was too unwilling to agree to his perspective on things. He wanted to take some more risky legal positions than I was comfortable with. My supervisor completely backed me up. Was very supportive of my position. His supervisor, we'll call this guy Sam, Sam's supervisor even wanted more legally aggressive positions than Sam wanted to make. And so, admittedly, Sam was in this difficult position. He had this boss who wanted Sam to take aggressive positions. He had me saying, no, 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 you can't do that. And so, understandably, he was in kind of a difficult position. Well, on this particular day, we had it out about several different issues, and he had sent me one more email that I didn't care for. I thought, oh, he's doing the same stuff he always does. He's wanting to do things that are not smart, that are not good business decisions, not good legal decisions. And so I wanted my boss to be aware of it because I knew that Sam's boss was probably going to call my boss and say, why isn't Gruber letting you do this? So I forwarded it to my boss, and I said something like, here we go again, ... Cindy. Well, guess what? I didn't forward it to my boss. Instead of forwarding it, I replied. And so it went to Sam, and he saw, here we go again, Cindy. Or I think I said my boss's name was, and my boss at that time was Mike. Mike, here we go again, ... Cindy. It was clearly an expression of exasperation and a little bit of contempt for Sam. I was mortified when I realized I had hit it. I contacted Sam and apologized. And he was actually more gracious about it than I had expected. He was mature. He goes, hey, everyone's done that. Everybody gets frustrated sometimes. And so it wasn't nearly as bad a situation as it could have been because Sam was so gracious. That will happen to you. If it hasn't yet, it will. No matter how careful you are, you will send to the wrong person. That particular time, it was embarrassing for me, but it was not a breach of the attorney-client privilege. But it could have gone another way. Let's say this had been a correspondence from outside counsel, and I wanted to forward it to my client, and I might have said something like, I think we ought to take this deal. It's a really good one for us. And instead of forwarding it to the client, I replied back to opposing counsel. Well, gee whiz, now he knows what my recommendation is going to be. He's not going to be, if my ultimate position is, well, we want more money, well, he knows that he probably doesn't really have to offer me more money because we're really still pretty good with where we were, with what he is offering. So you can see how it can be malpractice even to do something like that. It can certainly cost your client money, put you in a very embarrassing situation. So when you are in a situation where you think to yourself, if I accidentally send this to the wrong person, is that going to be bad? And that probably means I should not use email. And if you happen to use email and decide to do it, you have to check and double check and check again to make sure your list of recipients is correct. Many people have an autofill on their email, so if you start typing, the first couple of letters of a person's email address, it populates it. And I recommend that you turn that off in a legal practice simply because you might have several people whose names start the same, and if it auto-populates, you may not catch it. Now, if you don't have the auto-population, you have to make sure that you type carefully because, of course, if you leave out a letter or add too many of one letter, it won't get to the recipient. So you have to visually check it, and you also probably ought to look out for emails that bounce back. Those are some strategies, but no strategy in the world is going to work 100% of the time, and that's why emails should not be used to send very, very confidential or important emails. So keep in mind, don't do it if doing it incorrectly is going to have dramatic impact. Another disadvantage, this is also an advantage, is that it creates a permanent record. One of the biggest changes in the area of employment law that has happened since I started practicing in 1990 was the development of the email. Prior to that, if I wanted to complain about my boss or my coworker or my subordinate, I just sat down and talked with somebody. And I might have complained and said, I cannot believe how crazy Larry is. Oh my gosh, he's so demanding, he's so ridiculous. Or if I wanted to tell an off-color joke, I would tell it, in the coffee room or in the bathroom or quietly in someone's office. But you know what? People do sometimes have those conversations. A lot more of it happens via email. And so people will put in an email what they would have once upon a time said to somebody. And probably more putting an email, they will forward the email with a funny joke that they got from a friend. This is terrible. This is a nightmare for employment attorneys because there's a permanent record of it. You can hit the delete button. But every person who you sent it to can hit the delete button, and it is not at all deleted. It will probably never be deleted. It will be recoverable years and years afterwards. Even if you draft it and never hit send, there's a pretty good chance that it can be recovered. So this is something that's important to keep in mind. It is permanent. That's good if you need to have a record that you sent it, but it's bad if there's something in it that can come back and haunt you. And if you deal with litigation, you will discover that a lot of these emails can come up and be that smoking gun that really sinks your client. Or it can be the email that really helps your client. Of course, it can work either way. So keep that in mind. Whatever email you send, you ought to consider it being a permanent record. A rule of thumb that a litigator with whom I worked with would say is, before you hit the send button on an email, imagine it blown up to a huge poster size stuck on an easel in the courtroom, and imagine 12 jurors and a judge staring at what you typed. And if you're okay with them doing that, if you feel like what you typed makes sense, makes you look good, makes your client look good, then you should go ahead and hit send. But if you aren't sure that that is the impression it's going to make, then don't hit send. And of course that applies to not only the content but the style. Do you have typos in it? Are there some jokes that maybe aren't in the best of taste? And maybe they're jokes that make sense within the relationship, but jokes when taken out of the relationship might strike somebody as offensive in some respect. So keep this in mind. Imagine, and another thing people tend to say is, before you hit the send button, imagine that you're sending it to your spouse, your priest, rabbi, or minister, and your mom. If all three of those people would be okay receiving this email and not think worse of you, then go ahead and send. But otherwise, probably do not send that email. You might need to talk to the person. You might need to verbally say whatever that information is, but it doesn't belong in an email. Okay, what's our next thing? The recipient will likely like its effective means. And you notice this is exactly the same bullet I have here. And that was a good thing. That's an advantage of email. It's also a disadvantage, because what is that recipient going to do with that email? Well, we don't know yet. We aren't the recipient, but I can tell you what often recipients will do. Let's imagine for a second that you are a client. You're not terribly legally sophisticated. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe you're suing or being sued, and your client sends you a note. Well, your spouse is very interested in what's going on in the case. You have a circle of friends who are also interested in it. And you get this email, you'd like to share it. Maybe it's great news. And yeah, you could write your own email and say, oh, I've just got great news from the attorney. But really, why would you want to do that? I mean, why not just forward it to all these people that are interested in knowing that you want to share with? So keep in mind the recipient is very likely to forward the email to people who are not within the attorney-client privilege. It's tremendously easy for him to do that. Yes, it's true, if you send him a paper letter, he could photocopy it and he could distribute it, but that's not likely to happen. And even if he does that, there's not a permanent record that it's been done. So it's hard for the other side to find the evidence that actually occurred. But with email, it's there. It's easy to find. It's easy to confirm. You know exactly who got it. You know exactly how far the privilege was waived. So keep that in mind. The recipient is not, you can't trust the recipient to be responsible with it. Then you may think, oh, I'll just explain to the recipient that they can't forward it. And I'll even put a note, a disclaimer on the form saying, please don't forward it. You can, and you should do both of those things. Those are good things to do. But keep in mind that your representation as client may last years. And the recipient isn't a legal professional and has so many other things on his or her mind, and they've forgotten about that conversation, and they don't read the fine print. Yes, it's possible that they may remember what you say and not hit the forward button, but it's also possible, probably even probable, that they don't remember or they don't care because it didn't seem that important to them at the time. So if you send an email, and even if you're careful to make sure no inappropriate people are receiving email from your computer, you can't have that level of certainty that the recipient will handle in the same way. So you have to assume that, you know, lots and lots of people receive it and the attorney-client privilege might be waived. And this basically goes to the next one. There is a possibility of unintended people receiving the email. Again, because of mistyping on your part. You mistyped someone's name and auto-populated, or you hit a reply instead of forward, or forward instead of reply, or it was forwarded by one or more recipients. Those are possibilities, and those can waive the privilege. Privilege is gone. Sometimes the waiver is only for whatever was included in the email. Well, that can be bad in and of itself. But sometimes the waiver can be so significant that the whole privilege is waived. You are talking massive malpractice lawsuit because you hit the send button on an email instead of spending the time to write a letter. So I don't want to worry you excessively about this, but it is a big concern, and it's one of the reasons why legal professionals, while they use email, do not use email for the most important correspondence, and they use it very carefully and in the right circumstances. So, what are the questions you ought to ask yourself? We talked about the pros, we talked about the cons. What are the questions you ought to ask yourself when you're deciding, should I use email or some other mode? Well, one thing is, what is your firm's policy on email? Be familiar with it, and not just the policy, the written policy, but how is it actually used? Notice how your boss uses email. In most cases, he's probably going to be CCing you or BCCing you on cases that are on email that relate to cases that you're working with. And if he isn't, you can ask him to. No guarantee he will or that he will remember to, but that can give you an idea about how often he uses it or for what things he uses it for. If he doesn't use it for very much, that's a really good sign that he is of the mindset that email should be used very infrequently and just for the most trivial matters. So I'm here, I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but I say, what would the boss do? This is a good rule of thumb, not just for email, lots of different areas. This is a useful rule of thumb, especially when you're starting out as a paralegal. But it's especially good here because you're going to find that bosses may not really have a defined rule that they can tell you, these are when I do email, these are when I don't, but they have a sense as to when it's appropriate and when it's not. And so if you watch, you can sometimes get more of a feel than if you actually ask the question directly. Now, of course, you should ask the question directly. You should say, well, you know, boss, tell me what types of communications I send by email, what types I ought to do with letter. The next question is, which strategy is safest for me? It's almost never going to be a bad idea to put it in a letter. It's almost never going to be a bad idea to make a telephone call. Now, again, there might be a few cases where you want that permanent record, and so, but even then, what you might do is send an email after the conversation saying, thank you for talking with me on this date regarding, and then just a very vague statement about what it's regarding. If you have any additional questions, please contact me. So you have a record that you actually had the conversation and talked about that topic, but you haven't gone into what was actually said. And so you'll find that usually the safest approach is either a letter or a telephone call. Email is not going to be the safest approach. Sometimes you can't be as safe as you'd like, but it's a good rule of thumb to consider that. Next of all, let's consider your client. Is your client likely to forward it to others? We already talked about this kind of in general terms. The more unsophisticated your client is, the greater the risk of this. The longer it's been since you've reminded the client, hey, don't forward my emails, the more likely he is to do that. The more exciting the news is, the more likely he is to do it. If he or she is a legal professional, and it's really not, a big deal thing, he's probably not going to forward it to people that he shouldn't. So, there are some people that are probably pretty safe to do this with, but you ought to be aware that, some of those people, even smart legal professionals, sometimes, especially when it's something that really matters to them, can forget what the best practice ought to be. The other one is, what would she prefer? He prefer. A lot of people like emails, but some people prefer the more personal touch of a telephone call or the more professional presentation of a letter. Even if he or she might prefer the convenience of an email, there's something about getting a letter from your attorney that kind of conveys a sense of respect for the client and formality and professionalism. So that there can be an upside, even though an email does some parts of that, a letter can really communicate that to a higher extent. So think about what your client would like. And then, of course, the big one is consider the content. If you're sharing attorney-client communications, if you're sharing attorney work product, if you're sharing stuff that you're developing your client, and not just saying the topic, for example, I'd like to discuss the car accident, period. Please call me. That's fine, because let's say the lawsuit that your client, you represent the client, relates to a car accident. Well, you haven't disclosed any attorney-client privilege. But if you start saying, I need some more information about the car accident, I know that you've told me that you're going about 35 miles an hour, you slammed on your brakes, and you rear into the car in front of you, and there was significant damage to the back bumper. But I want to know a little bit more about the road conditions at that time. Well, guess what? You have given your client's full position about the car accident. And if you inadvertently send it to the wrong person, or your client sends it to the wrong person, all of those communications are going to be waived. You don't want to do that. So you can describe a topic. What you can't do is say what the details of that topic. So in broad terms, you can say it, but not what the specifics are. So you don't want to cover this stuff. So if you're going to share attorney-client communications, the answer is don't put it in an email. Is it a complex matter that requires careful explanation? In my experience, this is the one that I see the most problems with from the students that I talk with. I will get an email saying, I just don't understand Chapter 14. Please explain it to me. Well, there's a textbook chapter with about 20 pages, and if you don't understand it, I guess you need more help than the 20 pages. So you're expecting me to explain every part of that chapter in more detail than is provided in the textbook. Does that seem reasonable? No, it doesn't, and it's not a very impressive statement. It shows that you haven't really considered, now wait a second, what am I really asking to be done? Maybe what your question really was is you don't understand item number 3 on page 17. Please explain what this term means and give me an example. Okay, that's something I probably can do in an email. The rule of thumb I have is when I write an email to somebody is can that person respond to that email in 3 sentences? And respond in a meaningful way will really satisfy what I'm looking for. If they can't do it in 3 sentences, then email is not a good way of approaching that. Now, the email can be a good way of saying, I don't get Chapter 14. I need to meet with you. That's great. That's a very effective way because to talk about a significant amount of material, of course, there's going to have to be a conversation. Email isn't going to do it. So keep in mind, if it's a complex matter, the email might be saying, hey, we need to talk about Chapter 14. What time would be good for you for us to get together and talk about that? So if it's a complex matter that requires very careful explanation, no, you don't do that through email. Will the email prompt a back and forth exchange that will ultimately take more time than a quick call? Again, this happens very commonly with emails. I'll get a question. Hi, I'm reading Chapter 14. I just don't understand it. So then I email back and say, well, I'm teaching 5 courses this semester, and there's a Chapter 14 in all of those courses. So I don't know which class you're in mine, or maybe you're in more than one class, and there's more than one Chapter 14 that you're dealing with. So tell me which class you're in. Okay, and I don't say it that way. I usually just say, what is your class? But you can see it prompts the back and forth. And then the next question is going to be, which portion of Chapter 14 are you confused about? Better that you anticipate the questions. Will you be able to anticipate every single one? Probably not. But if you anticipate a lot, and that's obvious from your email, you have bought the goodwill of the person who's receiving it. They can look at it and go, this person cared to think about their question. I still have questions to ask before I can really answer it, but I appreciate the effort that they've gone through. So if the email will prompt a back and forth exchange, then you don't want to send emails, or you want to make sure your email is very tightly written. Will the email create an opportunity for miscommunication? This is also another problem. This kind of relates to this one right here. Get the tone right. Emails are notorious for not communicating the tone of voice. I've heard surveys that about 80% of what we get from conversations is visual or the tone of voice. Only 20% are the actual words spoken. And so you can see how when you strip away the visual and the tone, and you just have the cold words, especially when they're dashed off quickly without a lot of care, there's so much opportunity for miscommunication, for ambiguity, for hurt feelings, for anger, and just for not effective communication. So think about that carefully. If it's a hot button issue, you want to read it a couple times and you want to think about it. Wait a second now. If I were the recipient and I got this email and I was mad, how would I take this? If I got this email and I was upset, how would I take it? If I'm the jury who doesn't know the complex background of my relationship with this person, would they understand what I was trying to communicate here? So a good rule of thumb is to consider where are the opportunities for miscommunication and how can I address those. One thing that we do in everyday emails, a lot of times we use emoticons or other expressions to communicate. You know, if we're saying something in an email that we think, well, maybe they'll take that in the wrong way, we might do LOL, laughing out loud. But we can't do that in a professional email, of course. So we lose some of our tools. But there are other ways of communicating that you are making a joke or something like that. And you can probably just kind of leave out the jokey stuff anyway. it's important that you get the tone right. Emails are not effective at capturing the tone, so you have to think through that carefully. You have to choose your words carefully. You don't want to be too terse. You want to write in complete sentences. While you don't want to engage in chatty talk or a lot of small talk, you do want to follow the formalities. You know, people really don't like it when they get an email that starts with a demand of some type. So start with, "Dear Mrs. Brown, : thank you for your question regarding blank." And you're probably thinking to yourself, "I don't thank Mrs. Brown for sending me that question. That was a terrible question she sent me." Well, again, this is the way that you're able to smooth feelings, you're able to build relationships. You start with a thank you. What you're really saying is not so much, "Oh, I'm so excited you sent me this question." What you're really saying is, "I acknowledge that I received your question. I thank you for putting it within my hands, the request that you've made, and now I'm going to address it." It's a gracious way of setting up the conversation. I could have said, "This email is going to respond to your question." But is that friendly? Is that warm? Is that inviting? No, it's not. If I'm going to answer Mrs. Brown's question, I might as well engage her in that process so she's on my side. After all, if we're changing emails, they're being point me answering her questions if I'm trying to antagonize her. So anticipate the ways that you can soften the tone. Let's think about the limitations of email. We already kind of talked about this earlier about am I asking email to do too much? They say you're not going to be sending a lot of emails in your professional life. In your personal life, of course, you'll probably be seeing a lot. If you ask email to do too much, it's not going to work out. So you have to be realistic about what it can accomplish and what it can't do. You might start writing an email and say, "Okay, this is just way too complicated for an email." And then cut and paste it into a letter and start working at it from that perspective. People do read letters differently than they read emails because they're expecting something casual and not too serious in an email. They're much less likely to carefully parse the language and really make sure that they're understanding what you're going to say. As I said before, it's not a good way to talk about complex issues. It's also not a good way to talk about sensitive issues. There's an old joke about the person who broke up with his or her significant other via email. We all are kind of appalled at those kind of jokes. We're like, surely no one will break up with a significant other via email or facsimile, I guess you don't want to hear. Well, sometimes people do that. That's not the best way. That's not, of course, I guess you're in a relationship, maybe you don't care, but it's not the way in a relationship that is going to continue in some way to handle that. If it really is a sensitive matter, for example, let's say you lost emotion and the client's not going to be happy. Well, you might think to yourself, well, an email saves me that unpleasant conversation, or the email gets the information to the client as soon as possible. I guess there are times where those might be overriding considerations, but usually having the conversation. You can set it up. You can start by saying, "Hey, Bob, got some news I need to share with you. Unfortunately, wasn't the news that I hoped I would be able to give you." And you're able to participate in his sorrow and make it, "We were disappointed. You and I together are disappointed in this." And you can talk through, well, this is what happened. You can answer his questions. You can talk about, well, here are the next steps. Here are the things we can do. Is this what you want me to do? And really build that confidence back up in your skill set. The email isn't going to do that. The person receiving is going to think he's dodging me. I've got all these questions, but I don't want to type them out in an email. I'm the one that has to call to start this conversation. That's not very fair. So you can see how most of the times if you got bad news, you're going to want to call. And you're probably even going to want to spend a few moments considering, what's the way to have this conversation? Well, how should that dialogue sound? You're not going to be able to control it all, but you can at least start the approach and think about the central things that you want to. For example, you might want to think through, what are going to be my recommendations going forward? What are the options? What are the pros and cons of each option? How can I diffuse the situation? Is there a positive aspect to it that might not be obvious to a casual observer? Okay. Here are two good questions that may help you decide whether emails are the right way to go. If you want a response, will the recipient be able to respond to your email in 3 sentences or less? If they can, this is good. So if you're sending someone an email that goes, "Can you meet with me tomorrow at 10 a.m. in my office?" That's a good, you'd want to have all the formatting, but if that's the question that you want to ask, that's very easy to do in an email. The person can say yes or no. fine. If they say no, ideal, and you might even want to have a follow-up question. If not, what would be a good time for you? And so the person could say no, but I can meet at 11. Okay, that's a short answer. But if you say something like, thank you for meeting with me for 3 hours yesterday. Please summarize what you said. No, that's not reasonable. That's not a good approach for an email message. So 3 sentences or less is a good rule of thumb. If it takes more than that, you probably need to have a face-to-face meeting or a telephone call at least. The next one, have I included all of the information the recipient will need? Anticipate the information that he will need. If you are dealing with, say, let's say you work for a defense law firm, and your client is a corporation, and so you are calling an attorney or paralegal in that corporation. Well, that attorney or paralegal might have a docket of 100 cases. So if you send an email saying, hey, I'm wanting some information about that car accident lawsuit, well, they may have 50 of those. And so they're going to sit back there and think, well, now, okay, this law firm name is, okay, I can remember it kind of, but, you know, I have 100 different law firms to track of. Oh, I see they're from the state of Wyoming. Okay, well, we have 3 accents there. Don't make it hard for that person. Make it easy. Make it easy because that's a kind thing to do, but make it easy for selfish reasons. The easier you make it for them to respond, the quicker you'll get a response, and the more complete the response is likely to be, because the person has good goals for you. They recognize, hey, you made it easy for me. When you make it tough, when they have to spend 30 minutes just figuring out what you want, who you are, what the case is, they aren't inclined to go above and beyond under their circumstances. Another thing, especially if it's an important email, is spend some time writing it. If you think to yourself, how long do I think the recipient is going to take to respond? You ought to be prepared to devote at least as much time to preparing it as you expect the recipient to spend responding to it. And so it's sometimes a good idea, especially if it's someone important. For example, say you're interviewing for a job, or it's your boss, and it's not just a very mundane thing, or a client. Consider having another person read it. Obviously, somebody who is within that attorney-client privilege scenario. So maybe a paralegal or an attorney, or perhaps a secretary. Say, hey, is this effective? Is this saying what I wanted to say? Are there any typos in it? Are there any things that might hurt feelings or might be ambiguous? That can be a good way. Now, of course, you can't do this with every single email that you're likely to send. And certainly after a while, people are going to probably take the view of, well, you know, you've asked me that 4 times today, so probably I'm not going to do it anymore. So some alternatives would be for you to get up or work on some other matter for 30 minutes, have this as saved document, come back and then look at it with fresh eyes. So you may be able to spot typos and other things that aren't clear after you've had a little bit of a break. If you're thinking about sending an email that's a little bit hot, that's a little bit emotional, that you're a little bit steamed at somebody, there's a good rule of thumb to wait 24 hours, if you can, before you send it. If you can't wait 24 hours, wait at least some time to see if, you know, okay, I've got my cool back. Maybe I still want to say some of these things, but maybe I can phrase them in a little bit less of a contentious manner. Okay, here are some examples of items that you might want to send via email or that you might want to choose another mode of communication. So let's go through some examples. You want to remind a client about a hearing date. But that's perfect for email, so I'm going to put an email there. If this client is forgetful and you really want them to be there, you might also want to call if there's someone who doesn't check their email regularly, but email makes a lot of sense in this situation. You want to discuss strategies regarding settlement offers. Well, this is not a good email approach. For one thing, it's such an involved topic that involves a back and forth, give and take, and it's just not conducive to email. Now, certainly you could send an email saying, we need to talk about settlement. What's a good time for you? That's very appropriate for email, but actually having that is probably going to be either a meeting or a telephone call. Even a letter isn't going to be a good mechanism for that because there's just too many variables. Let's say you want the client to call you. Well, an email makes a lot of sense. You might also want to leave a voicemail, though. Because in most cases, if you want somebody to call you, you probably tried to call them first. As a kind of an etiquette thing. If you want to talk to somebody, you probably ought not be saying to them, well, call me. I haven't called you, but go ahead and call me. So you're probably going to want to call them. Maybe you didn't want to leave a voicemail. There are certain sensitive matters that might not be appropriate to leave a voicemail for, but an email saying, hey, I tried to call you. You were away from your desk, and so please call me at your convenience. So next one, ask the client if he or she received your letter. Again, email is a very appropriate way. And this is one of these ones that you want to be careful how you phrase it, because it's kind of a sensitive matter. Maybe you're asking because you sent this letter 2 weeks ago and it said, please contact me immediately, and you haven't heard from them. And so you really are trying to prompt them to respond. And maybe you think, oh, well, they don't go through the mail that much. And so you're trying to light a fire under them. That might be one situation. Another situation might be thinking, geez, maybe they got lost in the mail, or maybe I had the wrong address on the letter. Maybe they've moved. And so you really are unsure if they actually got the letter. And so those are kind of two different meanings associated with it. But imagine if I'm the client and I really didn't get your letter, and you send this letter saying, Dear Sally, I sent you a letter 2 weeks ago and I have not heard from you yet, and yet I said it was urgent that you contact me immediately. Well, what's going on with you? You can see how I'm going to be a little bit up in arms at this point. Wait there, my law firm is fussing at me when no, I never got whatever it is they say I should have gotten. I'm going to be defensive. I'm going to be somewhat annoyed with the law firm. We're not going to start on a good track. Whatever it is that the law firm wants me to answer, wants me to do, I'm not that excited about doing something. But if I approach it from the perspective of, Dear Sally, just wanted to touch base with you. I've got some questions. You may recall that I sent you a letter a couple weeks ago and asked for your opinion about this particular matter. I hope you got the letter, but I recognize mail can be crazy. Please give me a call at your convenience so we can talk about this. It is kind of a time-sensitive matter, so if you would call me today, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Cindy Gruber. That would accomplish the same thing and probably make it more likely that I'm going to get a positive response. I'm going to be able to make that a little bit shorter, but I'm anticipating how my tone or the way I write it can lead to misunderstandings. Criticize something that your client did. Okay, definitely not email or letter. This is going to be a telephone call or a meeting. If you feel like you need to do a letter, maybe because whatever the client did was really, really shocking, and you have to have a permanent record. You will definitely want it in letter format, not in an email format. Forward a legal bill to the client. You're almost only going to do this in letter form. Now, I suppose if the client is, say, away from his office and just can't review his mail, you might want to have that nice letter, but attach the nice letter, probably scanned with your wet signature, but at least have it a nice looking regular letter on letterhead. You might attach that to an email if it's urgent, if they get it right away. You are not going to want to send a bill as a casual email item, because number one, it might get lost because people don't take their emails quite that seriously, and number two, it doesn't convey kind of the formality, the seriousness that you would like to have associated with the bill. Next one is explain your client's position on a particular legal point to the paralegal for the opposing party. This is probably going to be best done in a telephone call. Since it's a paralegal to paralegal, you're probably not going to have a meeting under these circumstances. And you're probably not going to want to lock yourself in to an email or a letter. Because as soon as you put in an email or a letter, let's say you missed a nuance, or a nuance develops later on that you weren't aware of at this time. When you're having a telephone conversation, unless they're taping it or something, whatever you say you have some wiggle room about. And they start thinking, well, you said in that conversation. Well, that's not how I recall that it happened, or there were developments after the fact. I see that's what your question is, but there were developments after the fact. So a telephone conversation is going to give you more ability to finesse changes in position or subtle variations on position. You definitely don't want to do an email. And of course, you might send an email to the paralegal saying, let's chat about this over the phone. And so the email might be an introduction to the conversation. After a telephone discussion about a court order, forward the order to the client. Now, this is fine. It's good to email this because you would attach it as an attachment to your email. You've already talked to the client. The client knows that it's coming, knows what the order says. You've already discussed whether it's a good thing or a bad thing and what the next steps will be, but the client actually wants to see the document. Perfectly reasonable. You could stick it in a letter, but that's going to mean that the client's not going to get it for a few days, so emailing it is a very effective use of email. And keep in mind, as long as you're just forwarding it to the client with just a attached, please find the court order dated June 14th, there's no attorney-client privilege that you're waiving. The court order is a public record, so it's a good use of email. Okay, so we've decided, whatever the issue is that we're working on, that we are going to use email. And now we're trying to decide, well, what do I need to add to my email to protect myself? There's always risks associated with using email. What do I need to add that's going to make it safer? Well, the first thing, which is fortunately something you're not going to have to worry too much about, is that you're going to probably have a footer on your emails and also on your facsimiles that has some language. It's going to be part of your signature block, which automatically populates on every single email that you send. And I have here an example of one of these. There's tons and tons of variations of this. This is actually an example from one of our readings for this unit, so it will be familiar to you. If it's for the most part, once you have this on your footer, you won't even think about it being there because, unless you go back and look at emails that you've sent, you won't even see it when you actually hit the send button. It'll only be attached after it's sent. But there could be some times where you decide, I want to disable that footer. Maybe it's because you're sending an email to your significant other via the company's email system, and you don't want to include that on there. So you can disable in that situation. My only concern about disabling it would be we have to be sure you turn it back on as soon as you're back to doing the legal work that you are being paid for. So under those circumstances, it's fine to disable it, but you have to have a really careful system that's going to make sure you put it back on, because again, when you hit send, you won't see the footer being there. So if suddenly you don't have it turned on, you won't know that it's not there. So it's usually a better practice just to leave it on, even when it's not a work issue. If you decide on a particular work document that you want to turn off the disclaimer, whatever the disclaimer is that your law firm uses, I recommend that you talk to the attorney and get his or her blessing before you're doing that. Again, this is the safest policy for you to have. The attorney might agree with you. Maybe there's a very sensitive issue, your client's mad at you, and the client's going to see this disclaimer and be more angry. Maybe there's a reason to turn it off under a certain circumstance. So that should be a very rare situation. You ought to have the attorney's blessing before you do that. This is an interesting thing. This is in another one of our readings. This is a footer from a law firm from Australia. And they don't have a footer. Footers, disclaiming footers, by the way, are ubiquitous with law firms. All law firms have it. But this law firm has this as their footer. We do not disclaim anything about this email. We're quite proud of it, really. So you can see that's a different take on it. I don't think while your attorney with whom you work is likely to find this an amusing disclaimer, non-disclaimer, I guess. They're probably not going to say, yeah, let's start adopting that for our law firm. It's kind of a little witty thing to put on your footer for your law firm. Okay, so that's an automatic. The footer that you're going to put on all of your emails going out, you're going to put it on probably your first day, and from then on, you almost don't think about it. You're also going to have some type of disclaimer like that on any facsimile form that you send. But let's talk about when you need more than that, or it may even be your firm policy if you do more than that. And the two big places where you can add more stuff is on the subject line and in the body of the email. Now, you may think, well, why do I need to do more than have a disclaimer in the footer? Well, the reality is none of us read the disclaimer in the footer. And so, honestly, we're attaching it, but we're really not, it's really not a very effective way of accomplishing it. Because what we're really doing is I want to be covered, but I don't really expect you to read this. And that's not going to get you too far in the law. Another problem with the footer is that in order for me to get to the footer, I have to have read the whole note. And many of the disclaimers are designed to help in the situation that you sent the email to the wrong person. Well, if the person gets the email and reads it, and now they're to the bottom where the disclaimer comes up, and now they're saying, oh, oh, okay, I'm supposed to do this. Well, guess what? They can't have unread what they just read. So if you really want to stop them from reading something they're not supposed to, you have to have that at the beginning. You need to either have it on the subject line or before any other content is available to them in the document. So for very, very sensitive emails, you shouldn't be sending them very often, but in that crisis situation, your client is, in a remote location and the only way you can reach them is by email. This can be a way. You can see here that what we've done is we've taken the Ray line and we've said what it is, motion for summary judgment, and then we put in parentheses privileged and confidential, attorney-client communication, and attorney work product. This, by the way, is a very common way of saying things. You'll see stamps in law firms or footers in lots of documents that have this language or something very close to it. So if you put this in your subject line, and I get it, I'm reminded, as a client, I'm reminded, oh yeah, this is kind of important stuff. And it might also help remind me, don't forward it to the world. And if it's sent to me accidentally, I'm like, I have no idea what the summary judgment motion is. Ooh, I think that person sent it to me in error. I can not open it. Now, I'm really not going to open it. Maybe I will open it, but at least I knew I wasn't probably supposed to open it. So the subject line can be a good tool for doing this, but of course it can make your subject line super, super long. And so that's a balance that you have to consider. Sometimes if your subject line is very long, the recipient will only be able to see the beginning parts of it, so they might not even see until they open it up the entire subject line. And if you had your disclaimer first, if I put, privileged and confidential before motion for summary judgment, the person receiving it doesn't even know what I'm sending about. They know it's privileged and confidential, but they say to themselves, well, I could have figured that out. This is from my attorney, so of course it's attorney-client communication. But I don't know that it's about the motion for summary judgment until I open it up, so it's not a very effective Ray line for the purpose of communicating what the email is about. Okay, so let's go to the body of the email. Either we've included this disclaimer in the Ray line or maybe we haven't. But you may want to put in this document some type of disclosure. Now, you might even put it before you say, Dear Bob. You might actually stick this up here. Just a reminder to maintain the special privileges of an attorney-client relationship. You should not forward any emails from our law firm to others or discuss their contents with others. You also should not CC or BCC others on emails that you send to the firm. So for the right client, you might want to have this leading up here, even before you get to the name, so that they will be on notice and will be in a position to hopefully remember that going forward. Now, if you could have it before then, you could also have it after the Dear Bob. Or perhaps after an introductory sentence that says, this email is about the motion for summary judgment. It doesn't really go into what the content is. I chose in this case to put it in the middle because emails, a thing that people have an expectation about is that they're going to be short and to the point. And if you have a lot of disclaimer language at the beginning, you're frustrating people. Really, what? This is stuff that should be in the footer. This should be at the end. This is stuff I'm not supposed to have to read. So why are you putting it on top? So you do have to consider kind of your expectations of your recipient. So I put it near the, kind of in the middle, but near the bottom. After I give the news, this is what I want Bob to know. And now I'm going to remind him, don't share this with others. And then I close with a closing sentence, and I say, sincerely, Cynthia Gruber, paralegal. And of course here, I always need to include the paralegal. It's probably going to be in my footer, which is probably going to have a signature block that is a more formal one. But I want to have it, if I don't have it in my footer, I want to have it for sure in the email that I actually send out, in the stuff that I type in. Let's go to the next slide. How should I write to the email message? Okay, so here we're going to get started on the specifics of the mechanics of doing this. And a good tool for you to have, especially if these aren't skills that you've developed yet, is to have a checklist. Legal professionals routinely use checklists for lots of purposes. If I am preparing a divorce petition, before I cover that with my client, and certainly before I file it with the court, I will have gone over the checklist that I have to make sure it has all the parts that I need to have. And my checklist will actually be longer than what I actually put into the document, because as I go through the checklist, there will be some items I think, oh no, don't need that in this case, or oh no, there's no kids, so we don't need a SAPSR, or oh no, this aspect doesn't apply to this particular marriage. So there will be certain things I say, no, don't have to do that here, but at least I want to ask myself the question. This is something, by the way, that surgeons do, that all kinds of medical professionals do. It's a smart way. Relying upon our memory is not the best way of ensuring we get all these things done. Having a checklist is really, really helpful. So think about using some of these things, and kind of each slide is devoted. My final slide, I have 2 bullets on, but most of the slides are devoted to one particular issue. The first one is begin well by being transparent. You want to have a ray line that is meaningful to the client. You want, or to the person receiving, you want to make it very easy for that client or that recipient or whoever that person is to get what you're going to be talking about. Another best practice is to limit yourself to 1 topic per email. Since you're not going to be sending a ton of emails, that's pretty easy to do. I once had a student who sent me an email, and in that email, which was well over a page long, she had 2 primary topics that she was talking about. We'll say topic A and topic B. She sent it, and then about 10 minutes after she sent it, she sent me another email, and the subject line was, please disregard the earlier email. Okay. Well, I actually opened the earlier email. I saw how long it was. I said, okay, I'm glad I can disregard this one. It saves me some time. She obviously found out whatever information she did. I didn't actually really read the email. I kind of scanned it. Then a few weeks later, or maybe a few days later, I can't remember, she contacted me. She goes, there was a volunteer opportunity. Well, why am I not on the list of volunteers? And I said, well, I'll say with Sally, you didn't ask to be a volunteer. And I've already filled all the spots, so I don't have an opportunity to volunteer for you this time. Maybe there'll be another opportunity. But I did volunteer. I said, I don't have a record of it. I said, you needed to email it to me if you wanted to volunteer. She said, I did, and here's the email. I said, but you sent, it was a long email. One of the topics that she had in her email was, I'd like to volunteer. I said, but you told me to disregard that email. And so, if I was aware that you had mentioned the email, I assumed you decided that it wasn't a convenient time for you to do it. But that's not what I meant. Well, that's what you said. So it's best to have 1 topic per email so that you can be sure that you're not, you can have a subject line that's meaningful, and you're also more likely to get the information that you need. If you have request too many things in an email, you're really giving the recipient the opportunity to not get you what you want. The recipient may pick the 1 question that's easiest for him or her to respond to, and ignore the rest of the question. You don't want to do that. So try to stick to this rule. If you have more than 1 topic, make sure that your subject line is adequate for that, and make sure each topic is really, really something that you can only, the recipient can answer with a question, 1 or 2 questions. In some cases, it may be better to send, even if it's minutes apart, a couple of different emails that list both topics, so that the writer can compose his thoughts on one and compose his thoughts on the other. And that's helpful for you too, because particularly if they're different matters, you may want to file one in one case file and the other in the other case file. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and clean this off since it's got a little bit messy here. Okay, we are now going to go to the next. Get my pen up again. Okay, in the subject line, also include client identification information to help you and the recipient easily file it. You'll see in one of the articles I posted that the individual who is in-house counsel, so he is in the role of the client when he hires outside law firms, the outside law firms will identify matters as his company was Aon. The Aon matter. Well, of course, the attorney who works with Aon goes, well, every matter I get is the Aon matter. That's the name of my company. What would be helpful for me is to know, whether it's, Baxter versus Aon or Baker versus Aon. So what I really want is not the Aon part, but the other party's part. That's the part that helps me file the document. So consider that. Especially if your client is likely to be getting multiple pieces of information regarding different cases or different legal matters. Have it be an identifier that makes sense for you, and Aon probably does make sense to the outside counsel because they maybe only have one Aon case, so immediately they know which one it is. But consider helping, especially when it's your client. consider helping him or her manage the document. So it's good to have that identifier. Now, I understand another reason why outside counsel would only just say A on matter, and that is that the subject line is short. And if you have to spend a lot of space describing what the matter is and then what you want to talk about, really, do you have enough space to do all that? And so there definitely is a balance to consider when you're talking about these matters. Of course, now I think it's going back to being crazy. Okay. Yeah. So have that client identifier. Many times you'll find in a law firm that they will have a file number. So let's imagine for a second that we're representing Aon in a matter. Well, we might have them identified in our documents as Aon 123. That's our file number. Again, that's not going to help Aon because Aon doesn't have the same filing system we do. So that can help you file documents. And of course, if you have a subject line, that's kind of a good thing, but keep in mind there's a relatively small amount of space in that subject line, so you may not have the luxury of putting all the information you might like. If the matter is urgent, it's a good idea to communicate that in the subject line. This is a very common thing that I deal with, again, because of the volume of email I get. Many of the emails I get are, Professor, thanks for writing that letter of reference. Or Professor, good class today. Or Professor, I'm going to have to miss class next Tuesday because I have a dentist appointment. A lot of emails I get, I don't have to do anything with. They're just kind of FYI type stuff. And so if I get so when I go through my emails, if the subject line doesn't say, the house is burning down, I need help right now, I am not going to jump on that. I'm going to jump on the ones that are most likely to be urgent. And so, and again, you don't want to abuse this. If you constantly send emails to people that say urgent, well, it's like the boy who cried wolf. But so if you want to choose your fights, choose your moments, use it rarely, but when you use it clearly. And a good way to do that would be to start with the word urgent in your subject line, or mark it as a high priority. Some email systems allow you to designate that way. If you're emailing out of your own company's email system, though, that marking may or may not be carried over into the new system. All caps can also accomplish that, but you probably don't want to have your whole subject line be all caps, because in a way that dilutes the urgent message. It may be that the writer's thinking, oh, he chooses to capitalize his whole subject line. That's just his practice. Well, no. But if you capitalize one or two big words, for example, urgent or ASAP or something along those lines, then that communicates, oh, yeah, this is something out of the ordinary. I need to pay attention to that. And you might also say, response needed. If you tell the reader that it's not FYI, this is not, I just want to let you know this, it's I need something from you after you get this. That can spark somebody paying a bit more attention to the matter. When we talk about classes, here's some suggestions when you are dealing in a class setting. Always be sure to include the course and the section. In this program, am blessed with having lots of students take multiple courses with me, sometimes in the same semester, sometimes it's in other semesters. And it's very easy for me to forget, is Sally in my federal civil litigation this semester or was it last semester? Or I may know Sally's taking a few courses of mine, but I can't tell right off the top which one it is, off the top of my head. So when she includes the information, including the section number, it helps point me where I'm going. If you're emailing me as a department chair and you're complaining about an instructor or some other thing that's happened, you know, you're asking me to do a lot of footwork if you don't tell me which course it is. That instructor may be teaching several courses, or sometimes they don't even tell me what the instructor's name is, and they just tell me something general like, you know, it's an LGLA course. Well, you know, I need more information. You aren't helping yourself. If your goal is to communicate information to me so I can solve your problem, make it easy for me to get that information. Make it easy for me to help you, because that's in your interest, right? Okay, so be sure to include the information about the course. If it's, this is an example about information you might have in a course, and I like to see it in the subject line. if this makes the line too long, you can have it in the first sentence of your actual email. There's another one here. Smith v. Jones Corporation need to schedule a meeting. So it tells the recipient, this is what the matter's about, and this is what needs to happen. And here's another topic, Smith Corp / Widget LLC contract negotiation abstract. So apparently this is some matter that's going on and you want to update the client or perhaps someone else. Then I have this urgent. Daniel's probate matter. Need information for hearing today. So I've communicated the urgency of the matter. And I need some particular feedback from the recipient. Okay, so we've talked about the subject line. Now we're into the real email message. The first thing you want to do is to greet the recipient cordially and professionally. And if you're sending an email to your best friend or your significant other, you might just start by saying, want to grab dinner, or let's see that movie. But when you are emailing somebody in a professional context, guess what? You are going to need to say, dear someone, colon. Now, if it were a letter, you'd want to say, dear Ms. Smith, or dear Mr. Brown and Miss Green, or dear Professor Smith. Those would be good ways in a formal letter. In an email, it is more appropriate sometimes to use a first name. I have two first names here. There isn't a hard and fast rule in this situation. If you aren't sure, if you think that the Mr. or Mrs. is more appropriate, or Mr. and Ms. MS, you don't want to use Mrs. unless you know that person prefers the MRS designation. You ought to, if you're on the edge, not sure which one to use, go with a more formal. Then you will see people send professional emails in different formats. You might see someone start with, hi, Sue, or hi, Susan. Or you might have someone start with, hello. I prefer, dear Mary Cohen. And again, not the comma, but the colon. The comma signals this is a chatty little personal email. If it is a chatty little personal email, great. Use the comma. But when I see a comma, I immediately take off my professional hat. Okay, we're chatting. We're having a conversation. When I see the colon, oh, I'm in my professional mode. It's like a little light goes off in my head one way or the other. So you will see this. And if your attorney or your boss does hi Susan or does hello instead of dear, then you may well want to adapt to that. But if you're the attorney to whom you are assigned writes and emails dear such and such colon, then that's what you're going to want to model. And I recommend this be your default setting, especially when you don't know the preference. And certainly when you're talking with professors here, this is the way to go. Dear Professor Green, colon, then start. Let's see any other points to talk about with this. I think that pretty much covers it. Then you will want to hit an enter button and start the text on the next line. Make it look attractive. Okay, now we're going to put the email in context. Then the recipient has seen the subject, and they've probably seen who has sent them this email. But now you're trying to set the scene. You're trying to, basically this is your opportunity to say, this is why I'm sending this to you. And maybe it's something you didn't really want to put in your subject line. So you're going to want to put it in context. The first thing you're going to want to do is tell the recipient who you are. Now, if you are the recipient's paralegal and y'all talk once a week for the last 6 months, then obviously it'd be ridiculous for you to start saying, I am Sally Smith, comma, the paralegal assigned to your case, period. That would be weird and awkward. The recipient would be like, of course I know who you are. Why are you telling me this? But if you are not certain that that person has that level of familiarity with you, maybe they've met you before, maybe even more than once, but it's been a long time, it may be a good idea to remind them, especially if your email address doesn't communicate who you are. Let's say you happen to be using, for example, you're not using your Cougar Mail email address, or your Cougar Mail email address has a different surname than the name that you go by now. Those can be 2 times where the recipient's like, what? Who is this person? I don't know this person. Oh, now I do. Now they're telling me who they are. Okay, so you want to begin by explaining who you are. Here's an example of an effective one. I am a student in this particular class. Or, I am Tom, the paralegal who works with attorney Amanda Green. Again, you're going to skip this if it's obvious under the circumstances that the person knows who you are, even though it might be somewhat out of context for them. Okay, so you've explained. Actually, I have a G here. I'm sorry if you have a typo. Everyone does typos. Certainly, I am not immune to it, and I apologize for that. Okay, so now you're going to explain why you're emailing. I like to have my first sentence, I am Tom, paralegal to do. Like to have that be its own sentence. And then the next sentence is I'm going to say why I, Tom, am emailing you. Now you may say, but you told us letters can't be one paragraph unless they're the final sentence in a letter. That is true with a letter. With an email, that rule is relaxed. You can have one sentence paragraphs in an email. And in fact, I think they tend to be quite effective because your email is going to be very short and your email is going to be designed to make it tremendously easy for the reader to read. So you want to probably have more paragraphs. You might have every sentence be a paragraph just for the ease of reading. But you don't have to. I mean, you may decide, no, I can start by introducing myself again and then saying what my purpose is in one paragraph. That's not wrong, but if you decide to break it up into 2 paragraphs, that's also fine. If you haven't already communicated urgency, this is now the time to do so. You'll want to say, it's urgent that I get this information from you. Please respond as soon as possible. And ideally, if it's really urgent, you'll set a deadline for that. Email paragraphs usually are going to be very short. One sentences are fine. So here's an example. Let's say you need some information from the instructor. You've already had a subject line that makes that clear. You've explained what the course is. You've told the instructor who you are and from what course. Now you're ready for the next line. Please let me know when I can meet with you to discuss Chapter 14. I have class during your office hours, but I can meet between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. on Monday and 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on Tuesday. So I've explained what I need from you, and I have started the conversation. I don't think I've ever gotten an email this way. I have gotten emails that people have clearly explained that they need to meet with me, and they've told me what they need to meet with me about. I've even had emails where they've said to me, I can't meet with you during your office hours, but I don't think I've ever had anybody suggest alternative times. I don't know if it's because they feel that that's forward of them to do so or not, but it invariably, well, you can't meet with me during my office hours, so obviously we're going to have to come up with some other time to meet. So I'll send back a note saying, what are 3 times that you are available to meet? And then they will come back with 3 times, and then I'll say which times work best for me, and then we'll perhaps get something going. But you really don't want to have a ton of back and forth, especially if you need to get the information, because a ton of back and forth with emails means it's probably going to take a couple days to get it all resolved. So the more effort that you can make up front to anticipate the questions I'm going to ask in a polite way, it's going to get us there a lot quicker, because now I'm going to be able to respond to this message saying, well, I'm available at 2:30 on Monday. So I can email that back and say, please confirm that time works for you. I'll see you then. And then you can just respond by saying, yes, I will see you at 2:30 p.m. in your office on Monday. And we've got it. By having only 3 emails, we're able to accomplish that. If you had suggested the time, we would have probably needed at least 2 more emails in that pattern. That clogs up our email system. It's not a good use of time. Here's another one. I am emailing you regarding the Smith and Green case. And I might have wanted to go into more specifics. I'm not sure this is the best one. What aspect of the case are you emailing me? Presumably my subject line has already told you what the matter is, but it's probably a good idea to provide a little bit more detail. So I would say this one is above asked. Here's another one. There is a significant development in the case that needs your immediate attention. Maybe this is the second line after Smith v. Green case. So this kind of sets up, hey, this is urgent. Need your help right now. So what is the next thing? We have crafted an effective subject line, array line. We have created an appropriate salutation. We have reintroduced ourselves if we need to. We've briefly described what the subject is. Now we are into why we sent the email, the actual content, the actual body of the emails that we're working on now. This can be really, really brief. It can be 1 sentence. It can also be longer than 1 sentence. There is no need in an email to be chatty. If you're talking to somebody on the phone, you're probably not going to cut to the chase in the first few seconds. but an email, that's fine. You probably want to avoid the chatty stuff. If you are sending an email, you may also flesh out the document a little bit longer than you otherwise would. You don't want to have a lot of one-sentence paragraphs, so perhaps you're breaking things into more sentences, maybe adding some filler to make the letter look more substantive, so that it looks a little bit more professional. But an email, you don't have to fluff things up. You can go where you are right there. If you need to share a lot of information, if you're finding that this is 3 and 4 paragraphs long, this is something that needs a letter. This is something that doesn't need an email or needs a meeting. And so that's when you say, please call me, or I will call you at this time unless you give me a better time to call. If your email has more than 5 sentences, you probably should forego email and write a letter. Now let's say 5 sentences after your first 2 sentences where you introduce yourself and you tell them the topic. So you might have up to 7 sentences. If you find that you have more than that you need to say, it's really too complex of an idea for an email. So that's when you say, hey, can we talk? And maybe have the conversation at that point. Or put it in a letter. Okay, so now we're up to the closing. You want to close professionally and cordially. When you use the same, you can use the same closings that you use in your letter. Probably you're going to be using very truly yours or sincerely. But you don't have to. There's lots of other closings that are perfectly fine. I usually use regards. Sometimes I'll say best regards. I will sometimes say best wishes. I'll sometimes say thanks. Those are common ones. I vary mine depending upon the situation. If I'm trying to create goodwill but I have bad news to share, I might say best wishes. If I'm expressing condolences or trying to empathize with somebody's circumstances, I might say best wishes. If I am, my standard closing, at least when I was practicing, was thanks. That's what I close with. And I may not even ask them to do anything, but what I'm really saying is thanks for reading my email. Thanks for, following through with what I put in front of you. And that can be a good way of doing it. But it's certainly not the only way that you can do it. The thing about an email a closure is that it doesn't have to be the same every single time, unless your firm has a policy about this. You are probably going to have in your footer an automatic signature file. You'll have that disclaimer in your footer, but you'll also have a set signature file that will come up, and it will probably be a fairly formal one. You'll probably have very truly yours, Mary Smith, paralegal, like this right here. But just because you have that automatic signature file, and that's definitely going to show up, it doesn't mean that you can't also have a more informal closing. So you could have a more informal closing that says, thanks, Mary, and you don't have to say paralegal at that point. You don't even have to say your last name because you know that your footer is going to pop up, and so right below your thanks, Mary, you'll have the very truly yours, Mary Smith, paralegal, and then the disclaimer. So don't think that because you're on that signature file, you can't use a more casual and more warm closure than the one that you have. In fact, I think having both is kind of a good mix. You do not want to have in your signature box any deep, funny, spiritual sayings or pictures. No need for any of that. They can be offensive, and even if they aren't offensive to the person receiving them, they can make you seem a little foolish. And maybe a little young or perhaps immature. So just leave that out. If you have sayings that you like, those are things that you might put on a towel in or post in your own home, or perhaps even post in your office. But in your signature blank, it's not your job to move people to tears or to make them laugh. Your job is to communicate a business message. So here are examples, and of course you'd have these in 3 lines. Very truly yours, comma, on the first line. The next line, Mary Smith. You wouldn't actually have a comma here because you're going to put paralegal on the 3rd line. If you chose to only do it with 2 lines, you would have a comma and you'd have Mary Smith, comma, paralegal on the same line. You don't need to have an extra space between very truly yours and Mary Smith unless you choose to use kind of a cursive-y font to kind of fake a signature that you might have otherwise signed. So you'd have very truly yours, comma. Next line, you'd have a cursive-like signature, then the next line you'd have a normal font, maybe Times New Roman font for Mary Smith, and then paralegal. So, but you don't need a space there because you're not actually going to write your name because you're using the space for that. Same way here, sincerely, comma, next line, Dan Davis, next line, paralegal, or you could have Dan Davis, comma, paralegal on the same line. And this goes forward along the same line we talked about before. Okay. Here are our last two items. Maybe these are the last two items. Almost. Last two substantive items, I guess, is maintain a professional tone. What I'm getting at here is you need to use correct grammar. You need to have correct standard spelling. You should only use standard abbreviations and standard punctuation. So you shouldn't use the number 4 to mean 4. You shouldn't use things like LOL in a professional email. Obviously, if you're sending things to your friend, that's fine. You want to avoid slang generally. I think that contractions are not appropriate in business letters, but they're fine in an email. You might find an attorney that disagrees, but that's a difference of opinion there. So you do have to think about your writing. It's not, you don't get a pass because it's email. Yes, you will send emails that have typos in them, and you'll be mortified. You will send emails that there's a grammatical problem, and you'll be mortified. But it happens. But you want it to happen the bare minimum of times, and that's one of the reasons that you have to read and reread. And very likely use some kind of a spell check or grammar check on your emails. You want to avoid things like jokes, sarcasm, or silliness. For one thing, that kind of content is going to make your emails longer, and you don't want them long. Number 2, email is tone deaf. So that funny joke that you had really makes you sound very strange because the person isn't sure whether it's a joke or whether you're serious, and they don't know how to respond. Ha ha, or I'm so sorry to hear that. You know, and again, sarcasm has the same problem, so don't do it. Just leave it out. If you're a funny person or a sarcastic person and you want to share that in live conversations, go for it. But in email, don't put it in there. Also avoid exclamation points. In fact, I would say probably don't use them in professional writing. I actually did use them, not infrequently. I found it a way to kind of lighten the tone sometimes, encourage people, things like that. But I probably use it more than I ought to have, and certainly when you use it, you ought to think to yourself, why am I using it? Why am I not using a period? And you ought to have a reason, and it ought to be a reason that isn't about telling a joke, being sarcastic, or being silly. If you choose to use an exclamation point, only use one. There's no need to use more than one. It doesn't make it more exclamatory, I guess is the word. Also, don't use more than one question mark. Also, don't use a question mark and an exclamation mark. That doesn't make any sense in a professional email. And then finally, proofread your work. You're going to want to look for missing words. You're going to want to look for typos where you might have reversed the digits on a number or something along those lines. They're hard to find your own typos, and that's one of the reasons why it's useful to have someone else review your work. If you spend a lot of time on an email, you may have found that you move stuff around. That's great that you worked hard on it. That's wonderful. But you have to be especially careful when you're proofing that, because you may have inadvertently left in a word that made sense in the initial version, but it doesn't make sense now. And it's really hard to see that word when you aren't expecting it to be there. So you read it 20 times and you never see that word that's really out of place. Tools like autocorrect are great for emails, but they can not be good. We've all seen on Facebook and other places the jokes about how autocorrect has changed an email or an IM for somebody, a text from somebody that results in some kind of embarrassing situation. So it may be a good idea to turn it off, or if you use it, you need to be sure that it's being used appropriately and that you're making sure that any changes that it makes, you're approving. Okay, so ready for the final slide here. Pause before sending it. Especially if it's an important one, especially if it's an emotional topic, you want to think carefully before you send it. People don't invest the time that they ought to in emails. They treat it more casually than they ought to. Don't be one of those people. You'll, of course, want to check it carefully for errors, but you probably are going to want to check it for tone. And when you're in the midst of writing it and you hear your own voice, and so you are animating it with the tone that you want it to have, keep in mind that that recipient isn't going to be hearing your tone in their ear. They're going to be hearing their own tone, and if they've had a bad day, it might sound wrong to them. Another thing to think about, and we haven't really talked about this issue yet, is who should you CC or BCC? It's sometimes a good practice to CC or BCC the attorney, but I would say probably a good practice to CC or BCC the attorney on any correspondence in the case. It's something you're probably going to want to talk to the attorney about, though. The attorney may say, I don't want to get 50 extra emails a day. So then in those circumstances, you obviously want to comply with his request or her request. But it's a good way of keeping the attorney informed, and it's a good way of complying with your need. Your need as a legal professional to be getting guidance from him. So if you say something in an email that's wrong, he can say, oh, we're not doing it that way. Let me tell you how we're handling this matter, and that you need to send a corrected email or something along those lines. Sometimes it's done that the attorney is CC'd, and sometimes he or she is BCC'd. Again, I would talk to the attorney to see what his or her preferences are. Another issue is whether you want to CC or BCC the client. Again, this is a good topic to talk to the attorney, both in global terms, if he or she would like the client to always be covered and to make it for a CC or BCC. But then sometimes in specific issues, the attorney may have a general rule of thumb, yes, we do, or no, we don't, but there may be a particular client that it makes sense to vary that process. For example, if you have a client who is especially needy, and whenever you CC them on it, they will be calling you saying, tell me what's happening. Well, that's not very constructive for the office, and so that person, you might be someone that you only CC on the important task. You might have another person who's told the attorney, I want to see everything that relates to my case. Well, then, of course, you're going to be CCing or BCCing him or her on everything. So there can be different standards or different decisions based on the circumstances. Let me first of all explain what CC and BCC are. I know we've talked about this in the context of letters. It works the same way, though, with email. If I BCC somebody, the BCC, this is one difference between emails and letters. So in a letter, most of the time, although it doesn't have to be the case, this is usual, most of the time, all of the BCCs, all the people who received a blind carbon copy, know what the recipient got, and know that the CC got that. But most of the time, the BCCs also see all of the other BCCs. So let's say I BCC Mary, Larry, and Harry. Well, Mary knows that Larry got it, and Mary knows that Harry got it. And so Larry knows that Mary got it, and Harry knows that Mary and Larry got it. They all know about each other. With emails, that's not the case. So if I am BCC'd on an email, I know what I got. I know that I got it, obviously. I can see who was CC'd on it, and I can see who is the main recipient. But I don't know, if I'm Mary, I don't know if Larry got a BCC or not. I don't know if Harry got a BCC or not. So that is, I guess, a technological innovation with respect to the email. If you hit reply all and you are the CC or the true recipient, usually the BCCs will not receive a copy of it because they are kind of cut off from getting that transmission. It's good to know how your system works to confirm that's the case, or to make sure that you're not inadvertently BCCing or sending copies to people that you don't know about. Check the sender's and any BCC or CC's email address at least twice before sending. And again, be sure that the autocorrect is not going to cause us to get it right way. It's better, in my opinion, to send it to incorrectly type it than to inadvertently send it to the wrong address. Because if you incorrectly type it, it's going to bounce back. You will get a note saying, hey, this wasn't received by the recipient, so then you can fix it. But if you send it to the wrong recipient, you won't ever be told. And that wrong recipient's receipt of that letter may be something that violates the attorney-client privilege. And finally, file your sent email appropriately. You may have email folders to file it in. You may have some kind of document management system that you'll be allowed to or to transfer these into some type of file. You may, in your law firm, choose to print these up and actually put them in a paper file. But whatever your system is, be sure to do that and keep that file up to date. If you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to email me. If it's obviously don't follow the procedures we talked about. If it's a question of general interest, I'll probably post it for the whole class. If it's a question of particular interest and I can answer it in 3 sentences or less, I will be glad to do so. If you have a more involved question, please feel free to come to my office hours. You may want to bring some emails that you've used in the past, and we can talk about ways that they could have been better, especially ones that perhaps you did in a working environment or perhaps ones you did in a job search situation. Thank you for your attention. Oh, actually, before we do this, I'm going to open up my desktop for just a couple minutes and show you some additional tools that are available in Module 12. Okay, so now I'm showing my desktop. I'm going to go here. We are in, I'm going to go to Learning Modules. I see a typo here. I apologize. It should be effective emails assigned reading. This is the PowerPoint. We have 10 tips for emails assigned reading. Be sure to read that. Articles about email disclaimers. There's some examples of email disclaimers. Actually, this section is the examples of email disclaimers. This is actually kind of a funny article. I think you'll especially enjoy that. And this one, let me actually open this up so you can see what it looks like. Okay, what we're looking for here is the article, Are Emails Between Attorneys and Clients Protected by the Attorney-Client Privilege? So we're actually going to have to look for that. We can look here. Okay, so it's actually on page 6. It looks like it's page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Here we go, page 6. Are emails between attorneys and clients protected by the attorney-client privilege? This is going to have some emphasis upon Michigan law, I believe. And you can see here, you don't need to read the part that says right here that says implied warranty. That's not related here. So you're going to read this column, this column, this column, and then you're going to see that you need to go to page 10 to finish up. You have in newspapers, they sometimes make you jump from one place to another. Well, same deal here. And page 10 is the final page, maybe it's not. Here we go. So here we are on page 10. So you'll want to read. Basically, this whole page is devoted to this. And so that's it. So part of page 6 and all of page 10 will get you done. Now, there is no assignment in this unit, and there is no discussion board, but all of the material in this lecture and in the assigned readings are free game for the final examination. And I certainly don't expect you to memorize case names and the holdings in particular cases. I'm looking for practical application. So very likely on your final exam, the types of questions you're going to be asked are things like, is this an effective email? What are the problems with it? Things along those lines. So a very practical approach to how to email. I am now going to end our lecture. Thank you for your attention. I hope you have a great day.